Taking a look at the top side of the chassis, just noting a few things. Rubber grommets are deteriorated. This wire here coming up out of the can to the grid cap of this tube is kind of frayed where it exits the can. This mounting bolt for the cover of the wire harness coming from the amplifier chassis is really loose. Other than that, it looks pretty clean. The lid that goes over the RF section of the radio is with the owner. Here's the broad and sharp tuning control. Moving the coils inside of the IF transformers to give the broad and sharp tuning. Going through the controls on the Stratosphere, the switch here is for turning the tweeters on and off. The switch is the on-off volume control. The switch here activates the relay that turns off the quiet AVC circuit. Got a temporary knob on here. This is the band switch. Again, this is the broad and sharp tuning control. Controls the coils on the IF cans. And this is the tuning. This control here is for the tone. And there's one more control over here. Unfortunately, I couldn't find out what exactly it's for. Don't know if it's phono switch, but that looks like it's in the back of the radio. I've moved the pilot light harness out of the way and tied on this piece of foam rubber so I can turn the chassis upside down, not do any harm to the wire harness or the dial. Also have the loose wire controls secured to the chassis with some painter's tape, so I can flip the chassis over without them flopping around. It looks like these light yellow tan wires going from these black wires were extensions to the on-off power control. I'm going to be removing those and see if the original wires will reach the terminals of the power switch. Looking at the power switch a little closer, it looks like it's a double pole, double throw switch here. It's got 3 terminals coming off it, so I think this is a replacement of the original. I think the original control would have had the terminals coming out of the top here. To correct myself in the last video, this is a single pole double throw switch used for the on-off power. I tested the switch and it seems to be intermittent. I'm going to be removing it and then soaking it in some ammonia for about a half hour, and then spray it out really well and see if that cleans up the contacts inside. Switch is removed, ready for its bath. I'm sure it's not had a bath in decades now. Hopefully it'll come out squeaky clean and work really well. Looking at this Q switch, original switch here, it's totally different than the power switch. Also, what Zenith did to make sure that the tab didn't come off of the switch, they soldered a little piece of tin across the end. I've unsoldered these light colored power leads from the switch. Looks like the original leads will be long enough. If they come up a little bit short, I'll solder a little length of wire on the ends and then probably just cover it with heat shrink. I scraped off tar that was here with a razor blade. Took the rest of the residue off with some goof off. Now we'll take some chrome polish, just clean up the chrome. Chrome's all cleaned up now. I've cleaned the switch. Looks like it'll work well. But the wiring going to it, the shielded wire, it's all done incorrectly. That shield should be peeled back to go to the ground terminal here. And this ground lead that they have soldered on so poorly needs to be removed. And also the the center wire in that shielded wire is probably frayed and in bad shape, so I'll be putting some heat shrink on it to assure that it won't short out with a shield. That ground jumper has been removed. The shield has been cut back on the shielded cable so I can connect to the ground lug on the switch. The cloth covered center wire seems to be in good shape. The power switch has been cleaned and reinstalled. And the original wires have been reconnected to the switch. The shield's been peeled back from the conductor. I'm going to place some heat shrink over that conductor inside just to assure its insulation stays intact. The switch has been reinstalled, correctly wired. Heat shrink was added on this grid cap lead. The wires were frayed at each end where it entered the grid cap. Could have grounded out on the shield of the 66 tube. And then also where it went to the IF can. It's pretty well frayed and could have shorted out on that rivet there. Plug disconnects were added on the wire going to the tweeters from the radio chassis. So in the future, if the radio chassis or the amplifier chassis is removed, these wires can be disconnected and not cut like they were twice before. Here's the operation of the broad, sharp tuning feature on the Stratosphere. Again, the controls over here through the connecting rod to the gear assembly in the front. Underneath the chassis moves these cams, which moves these plungers in and out, which I assume moves the coil in and out on each of these two IF transformers. These three paper capacitors have been removed from the radio chassis in preparation for restuffing. It only took a few minutes to get the inside of the capacitors out of the shells with a heat gun. Even though Zenith made their own capacitors in the Stratosphere, they use Sprague capacitors in the radio chassis. These are really high quality capacitors. They're almost built like a filter capacitor that's out of a German set. Aluminum shell, insulator on the end, and I guess the paper capacitors inside of this nice shell. Stuffing these capacitors is a learning process for me because I've been doing repairs for 42 years and really haven't done a restoration like this before. So I'm experimenting with different medium in terms of centering the leads that come out of the new capacitor inside of the shell, and then not using too much of the hot glue to seal it in. Right now I'm trying paper towels, but that seems to be pretty ineffective. I'll probably end up using cotton balls and stuffing those in there, so I use as little of the hot glue as possible. This first capacitor is stuffed. Use the hot glue to seal the ends. Looks like it turned out pretty well. Ready for reinstallation in the radio chassis. Cotton balls worked a lot better for stuffing the capacitors before putting the hot glue on the ends. Much quicker. It Took about a half hour to stuff these 3 caps. Most of that was learning experience and figuring out what materials to use for the stuffing. Keep the leads coming out of the cap centered. Again, I'm going to use cotton balls. I've set up my workshop so I can more efficiently remove these capacitors and restuff them and install them back in the radio. I've got the radio chassis on the workbench, got it on a towel, also underneath here to keep it level. I got a can sitting on a washcloth supported under one of the filter capacitors to keep it nice and even there. And over here I've got 2 stations. After I remove a capacitor, take it to this first station with a heat gun, remove the contents, and then slide over to this workstation, grab the correct capacitor out of my bins here, stuff them, put cotton on each end, and then with a heat gun put some hot glue to seal them up. And then swing back over here and reinstall them back in the radio chassis. One thing I noticed is the ground lugs for the bypass capacitors are screwed to the chassis instead of being riveted or spot welded to the chassis. I don't like that because the connection can go bad with oxidation and just the screw getting loose. I'm going to remove the can that goes over this IF coil, see how this plunger mechanism works, see if there's any parts that I got to replace under the can. Start with this can here. It looks like the can is supported by these bolts coming through the chassis here. One here, and one over here. I'll remove those and the cover should come right off. I was wrong, there's only 2 bolts that hold the can on. This other bolt sticking through the chassis is for another can, probably a RF can. During a previous repair, this original capacitor was disconnected from the ground lug. When they resoldered it, they didn't do a very good job, did they? I'm using some old solder of mine that I have for this radio. The newer solders just don't flow as well. This one works pretty well. Got it wound on my reel above the work table so I can just pull the solder as I need it. These 3 capacitors are restuffed, soldered back in the circuit. Foil side of the shells connected to the chassis. Also straightened up the wire around this second IF tube, 66. I checked the resistance of these 2 resistors here. This one should be 400 ohms, measures about 410 ohms. The screen isolation resistor should be 1.4K, measures 2K. I'll leave that in circuit because it's not critical that the resistances drifted that high.